বাংলাদেশ যুক্তরাষ্ট্র কূটনৈতিক সম্পর্কের ৫০ বছর পূর্তি উপলক্ষে প্রয়াত মার্কিন সিনেটর এডওয়ার্ড এম কেনেডির ছেলে এডওয়ার্ড এম কেনেডি জুনিয়র ও তার পরিবারের সদস্যরা ঢাকা বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ে পরিদর্শন করছেন। এই মুহূর্তে সিনেট ভবনে বক্তব্য রাখছেন এডওয়ার্ড এম কেনেডি জুনিয়র। সরাসরি চলে যাচ্ছি সেখানে।
Government's 50 years of bilateral relations with the government of Bangladesh. We were so honored, and in fact, all my family wanted to come. But as you know, I come from a big family. I mean, there are hundreds of Kennedys, so only a handful of us were able to make the trip. So we're here today to make a very important commemoration and recount the unique role that my father played in the country's struggle for independence. My father told me that the welcome that he received here at Dhaka University was one of the most memorable, emotional, and proudest moments of his entire political life. And I also want to take a few moments and explore the lessons of freedom and democracy building that the United States and Bangladesh have learned throughout our long-standing partnership and friendship, and discuss the future challenges that lay ahead. As I mentioned before, the Kennedy family has always felt a very special kinship with the people of Bangladesh, and we've always admired the unique spirit and pride exhibited by your citizens, who faced tremendous injustice, adversity, and bloodshed through your years in quest for independence and beyond. Observing firsthand the refugee crisis and other atrocities that were committed by the Pakistani army, my father was one of the very few political leaders to stand up and call the conduct of the Pakistani army a genocide, and jolting the international community to taking note with what was happening here in your country, in the hope that he could enlist other Americans, other members of Congress, and other people around the world to better understand what was happening and why the world should support the struggle for independence. You know, my father spent his entire life in his political career. He served in the United States Senate for almost 50 years, one of the longest serving members of the United States Senate, and his entire career was dedicated to fighting for the lives of the poorest and most disadvantaged people in our society in the United States and around the world. He believed that government had a responsibility to improve the quality of life for all of its citizens. And after nearly 50 years, over 300 pieces of legislation have been signed into law to improve health care, education, and the rights of people with disabilities due to the efforts of my father. He was always willing to cross party lines. He was they called him the liberal lion in Washington, D.C., because of his very progressive views on many different issues concerning human rights and justice and equality. But he was the first one who would cross the political aisle and try to collaborate and make progress with his Republican colleagues, with whom he could identify an issue that they had something in common. He was always trying to find something in common with each and every person that he worked with in the U.S. Senate. And he had a tremendous track record of collaborating with people from across the political spectrum in the United States. He was a champion of human rights, not just here in Bangladesh, but in Chile and Argentina and Northern Ireland and South Africa, and of course with the plight of refugees around the world. He was the chair of the Refugee Committee in the Senate, which is what brought him to India in the early 1970s. And he sponsored over 130 refugee-related bills, always trying to use his influence, any media attention that he could get, because he believed in humanitarianism and justice for all. Now, His interest, as you've heard here in Bangladesh, began when he visited the refugee camps in India, witnessing millions of people who fled this nation. You know the story of your nation. He stood in the muddy bank of the Kapathali River, watching boat after boat filled with refugees. And he burst into tears when he saw the young mothers in that camp holding their dead babies. And he heard firsthand how the West Pakistani Army had burned down houses throughout villages all over Bangladesh for no reason at all. And he learned about how the students here at Dhaka University were besieged by the Pakistani Army that invaded this campus and firing into halls, killing students, killing teachers, killing many people in front of their families and friends, and especially how Hindu neighborhoods were especially targeted for bombing. So he told us many of these stories while we were growing up, which is one of the reasons why we've always heard in the Kennedy family about the great nation of Bangladesh and why it's such an honor for us to finally be here to meet so many incredible people. You know, when he returned to Washington after his trip to India to look at and investigate the refugee camps there, he held important hearings in Washington to try to call attention to what has been going on. And he called Pakistani conduct a, quote, reign of terror. He pleaded with the world to take notice of the Pakistani brutality and the need to help the war's refugees and assist the freedom fighters. He issued in November 1971, he wrote and issued a scathing report on his observations called Crisis in South Asia, declaring, quote, nothing is more clear or more easily documented than the systemic campaign of terror and its genocidal consequences launched by the Pakistani Army on the night of March 25th. All of this has been officially sanctioned, ordered, and implemented under martial law from Islamabad. America's heavy support of Islamabad is nothing short of complicity in the human and political tragedy of East Bengal. That was just a section of his report that he wrote. And many of my father's assessments of the situation were also chronicled by the American diplomat at the time, Consul General Archer Blood, who many people here in Bangladesh know was removed from his post in Dhaka by President Nixon and Secretary of State Kissinger for criticizing the Nixon administration's support of the West Pakistani Army. And now is what's known as the famous Blood telegram. Mr. Blood sent the first ever, quote-unquote, dissent cable to the U.S. State Department from his post in Dhaka to protest the U.S. policy. And the Blood telegram is now an important reminder of the importance of dissenting views, as our ambassador just explained. The ability, and one of the great things about America is that you can stand up and say whatever you want and not be criticized for that. And but yet that existed in the U.S. State Department at the time, the reluctance of foreign service officers to offer their honest assessment of what was going on. And now the U.S. State Department holds Consul General Blood in the highest regard and has a formal process now where foreign service officers can send their unvarnished, honest opinions about what is going on throughout the world. And it wouldn't have happened but for this incredible, courageous foreign service officer. You know, one of my father's aides told me that when he was working with my father and Henry Kissinger, who of course was the Secretary of State who was supporting Pakistan. Henry Kissinger was walking down the hall with my father, and he said, "I just have a question for you, Senator Kennedy. I have a question for you." He goes, "What does humanitarian mean? I don't understand that." That's a quote. He didn't understand. He understood geopolitical power. He understood economic, how the U.S. should align ourselves militarily or economically with different countries from around the world. But he didn't understand a foreign policy that was built and based on freedom and humanitarianism. As I mentioned before, my father came back to Washington and fought for the end to economic aid to Pakistan, and fought to block and was successful on all future arms sales to Pakistan. Because remember, the U.S. government was supplying the arms to Pakistan during this time. In response to a question by the New York Times about Sheikh Mujibur's continued house arrest, my father said, quote, "The only crime Mujib is guilty of is winning an election." Again, my father had a very keen interest in world affairs growing up. He understood that the partition that was created after the Second World War, where you had essentially two countries that were cleaved in half by the country of India, that there was only a matter of time before Bangladesh would become an independent nation. It just made no sense historically, socially, geographically, politically. So I think that obviously when Pakistan called for an election and Sheikh Mujibur surprisingly won, it was no surprise to anyone how threatening that was for many, many people. So again, my father came here to Dhaka University on February 14th, 1972, and he was welcomed by thousands of students, so the press accounts say, and he, during his remarks, my father recalled what had happened on March 25th. He spoke about the rampage that happened here on this campus where thousands of students and faculty were randomly shot. He called on America to be on the right side of history. He drew parallels between the liberation movement in the United States and your country's liberation movement. And he said, quote, "Even though the United States government does not recognize you, the people of the world do recognize you." And I think it's important for you all to know that the vast majority of the people of the United States were on your side during this struggle for independence. So as we reflect on the 50 years that have happened since that time, it's clear that the partnership between our two countries has been a remarkable success. And Bangladesh and the United States are key partners in the world. The Bangladeshi economy, as you know, has expanded dramatically, and the United States really views a lot of these initiatives in agriculture and climate change, food security, global health, and we applaud your commitment to global peace as the largest troop contributor to UN peacekeeping operations. We know that your nation has gone above and beyond in hosting refugees from other countries, namely Myanmar and the 1 million Rohingya refugees who have escaped their own ethnic cleansing. And we thank you for the generosity and openness with which you've accommodated people. And we also thank you for your role in trying to get our world, our governments, our people to recognize the devastating impacts of climate change. You obviously have a country that is very susceptible to climate change and global warming, and we thank you very much for your leadership in awakening the rest of the world to this incredible catastrophe in the making. So when I think about how would my father likely view the future of U.S. Bangladeshi foreign policy, the way I think about it is what kind of country, what kind of world did my father fight for when he was alive? Now, I just want to say that America, we've had our growing pains too. Our democracy is the oldest in the world, and you know what? We face many problems today. We've got tremendous income inequality. We face racial issues. We have homelessness. We have a lot of issues in our country that we are, even though we're the wealthiest country in the world, we still have tremendous societal problems, and we still, many people still don't haven't achieved social justice. But my father spent his life fighting for the rights of people who've been left out and left behind. He had fought against government censorship and restrictions on freedom of mobility and assembly. My father fought against voting fraud and spent his life promoting free and fair elections. He tried to make it easier to register and vote, not harder to register and vote. And there's elements in the American society today that is trying to disenfranchise millions of people, making it very, very hard for people to vote by putting up all these barriers that will prevent them from going to the polls. And you can only ask yourself, why would somebody want to do that if they weren't confident that they could win an election in a free and fair way? He also believed that free and fair elections are impossible to achieve without a free press. And, you know, he was obviously in politics for many years. Do you think he liked all the things that were written about him in the newspaper as a politician? Of course not. Of course he thought that the press were at times unfair and inaccurate. But he believed in the freedom of the press. It's called the Fourth Estate in the United States, because he thought that even though he himself was repeatedly unfairly criticized, he thought that a free press was important for a fully functional democracy. He was, as I mentioned a few moments ago, he believed that the role of a political leader was to build consensus. You know, it's very easy to shout and to criticize about all the problems that we have. It's another skill, and I think the true skill of a legislator is to be able to find compromise and consensus, because my dad was very concerned about the concentration of political power in a single political party. He didn't think that was good for a democracy. He thought to have a fully functioning democracy, you needed to have elements in our society that were able to be openly critical, constructive, and he thought that the opposition and minority opinions needed to be accommodated. Otherwise, you were going to have social unrest. If people feel like their voices are not heard, there's going to be societal implications for that. And so he was always trying to improve communication between the Democratic and Republican Party, and dialogue and understanding each other's points of view and differences, and understanding really what the real issues were. He was the leading voice in my country to outlaw discrimination against gay Americans and to change our laws that made homosexuality a crime.
We thought in the case of, again, income inequality, and also he believed that it wasn't just unfair, but it was also destabilizing for a democracy. And so he was the leading voice in the U.S. labor movement and fought against restrictions on union organizing and collective bargaining. He believed that workers of the world should have more control over their own pay and working conditions and work schedules. And he sought justice for those falsely arrested by police simply because of their political views or other backgrounds. And he led the fight in the United States against police brutality and to strengthen laws that allow citizens to actually sue police departments, to hold individual officers, police departments, and their cities civilly and criminally liable for the use of excessive force. These were the things that my father believed in. So when you think about what makes the key ingredients of a successful, sustainable democracy, he believed that you needed to stand up for freedom and civil rights in the United States and around the world. And his policy, his foreign policy, was based on this concept of humanitarianism. That concept that Henry Kissinger found so difficult to try to understand was actually the key cornerstone of my father's view on foreign policy. So, although there have been some areas of disagreement and concern over the years between the government of Bangladesh and the government of the United States, the important thing is that our two nations continue to build the relationship and camaraderie in these areas of mutual interest. My uncle, the late President John F. Kennedy famously said, "And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." But in the second stanza, he said, "My fellow citizens of the world," he said, "ask not what America will do for you, but together what we can do for the freedom of man." Now, I realize this was 1960, so he probably would have said men and women, okay, today. But that's what the language was at that point in time. But you get the point. He believed that that we need to engage as citizens of the world. And it's not just the governments. We're celebrating the 50 years of bilateral relationships between our two governments. But that doesn't mean that as citizens, we can also form relationships and bonds and mutual respect and friendships. And that's why my family and I are here, because that's what we want to do with the people of Bangladesh. So I think in the next 50 years, we want to further these ties and continue to build a stronger relationship with Bangladesh. Now, just in closing, I just visited the banyan tree that, of course, I've heard about my entire life. The one that my father planted when he was here in 1972. He wanted to come here and plant that banyan tree to replace the one that the Pakistani army had come to this campus and they'd blown up the tree. They blew up the tree because it was known to be a popular student gathering place, and they knew that the campus, the Dhaka University, was a hotbed of rebellion and independence, and where a lot of these dissenting conversations just happened to take place was right underneath the banyan tree. So, of course, my father thought, we need to do something about that. Because as I just mentioned to you, he thought that political discourse and dissent and conversation about how we can build a better country was a critical part of democracy. So he hoped that this new tree that we just visited, it was a very powerful and emotional experience for me, and I know it was for I felt my father's presence when I was underneath that tree. And he hoped that tree would become a lasting symbol of friendship between the people of the United States and the people of Bangladesh, as well as a tribute to the Bangladeshi struggle for freedom and independence. And so 50 years later, that tree still stands. And it's a beacon of resilience, and it's a beacon of hope. And I think the U.S.-Bangladeshi partnership is kind of like that tree. It has weathered storms, and it has grown strong and broad. That's right, you can applaud. My father so admired the courage of the Bangladeshi citizens and your commitment to democracy. In planting the tree, my father said, quote, "The real foreign policy of America is citizen to citizen, friend to friend, people to people, foreign bonds of brotherhood that no tyranny can diminish. For in a sense, we are all Bengalis, we are all Americans, and we all share the great alliance of humanity." So let's work together to realize the many great opportunities that the next 50 years of our partnership will surely bring. Thank you again for inviting me to be your special guest here at Dhaka University. Just in closing, I have a couple of things. Mr. Vice Chancellor, I have a gift that I brought to you from the United States. There are some couplings from the United States Senate. These were my father's favorite cufflinks that he liked to wear. So hopefully when you're here at Dhaka University campus, you can wear those nice cufflinks. It has an American eagle with a lot of stars and that kind of stuff on it. Very American. So please enjoy that as a token of friendship from me and my family. And then I have a gift to you, for Dhaka University. Mr. Vice Chancellor, I'd like to present this to you. And it's it says, "To the librarian of Dhaka University, upon your nation's 50th anniversary as an independent country, I gift to Dhaka University Library an original copy of my father's groundbreaking 1971 report to the U.S. Congress. Crisis in South Asia. That's what the report was called. Crisis in South Asia was his personal account, observations, and conclusions of West Pakistani atrocities against the people of Bangladesh, and made the case for U.S. recognition of the independent nation of Bangladesh. He hoped that his advocacy would prompt other nations to support the struggle for freedom, independence, justice, and democracy. It is my hope that future students can learn that contrary to official U.S. policy at the time, the vast majority of Americans stood with the people of Bangladesh. I hope that the friendship between the people of the U.S. and Bangladesh will deepen even further over the coming 50 years. Thank you very much.